welcome to my rules presentation for Splatterspellen's Antiquity. Now, most of the screenshots and visuals from this are taken from the digital implementation, which is on play.boardgamecore.net. I'll have that link in the comments or in the description. I recommend playing it on there. It's asynchronous, so games can take some time. And when I do the playthrough in a subsequent video, it will be edited from an asynchronous playthrough. But there are no other digital implementations of Antiquity, so that's what we're going to deal with. So let's talk about how to play Antiquity. There are 2 player spaces in the game. The first player space is a communal player space, the countryside, the land, where players can interact with each other and where you'll have, it's basically a map. You'll have representation of where cities are and resources. So let's talk about what this area is going to look like. This is a player tile on the map. You can see these 2 down here are 2 different tiles. And the board is modular, so there is that variability. So what you have here is, imagine that this is your start tile, and anything within this white outline space is within your zone of control. We'll talk more about zone of control later, but just think anything that's inside the space you can build on, you can actively manipulate. Anything outside you might be able to passively manipulate, but you can't actively manipulate outside of your zone of control. So let's talk about what these different terrain types are. The first is this dark green forest terrain type. Now, the resource that can be harvested from forest is, of course, wood. And a woodcutter is the worker / building that will be harvesting from the forest space. So you can place a woodcutter on a forest hex, and the woodcutter will harvest from each adjacent forest hex. So in this case, if I built my woodcutter here, it would harvest from this hex and then the hex where I placed the woodcutter. If I placed the woodcutter here, it would harvest from these 3 spaces as well as these 2, which are outside of the zone of control, but are able to be passively affected by a building that's built within the zone of control. If I built a woodcutter here, it would only affect these 4 hexes. So remember, any of the adjacent hexes to where you placed the building originally. If you placed it here, you would be able to affect all 6 of these hexes, the 5 peripheral and the 1 initial. If you build here, you can affect these 3. If you build here, you can affect these 4. So you have access to every single forest hex on the board except for 1, and that's this one down here. There's no forest hexes adjacent to this hex within your zone of control, so you won't be able to harvest from that one, at least in the beginning, until you expand out your zone of control. You might notice these 2 flags. We'll talk about those in a second. Let's talk about this 3rd bullet point first. After you harvest from a forest space, it's going to become a field space. So when that happens, you won't be able to harvest wood from it anymore. You've already cleared it. You'll be able to do something else with it. The space itself will have changed. So going back to these flags, let's talk about what they are. They are discoveries. So each hex has 2 discoveries on it, and they can be explored for one of the 4 agricultural resources: sheep, wine, olives, and wheat. If it's one of the edible agricultural resources, wheat, olive, or sheep, famine is going to be raised by 1 point. And we'll talk about famine later when we talk about the different phases of the game. So don't worry about that just yet. So you're sending a worker to this hex, and like, whoa, I discovered all these sheep, and now we can raise some sheep. So what can we do with these agricultural goods? We might recall when we clear a forest, we end up with a field. So our second terrain type, just our second, is a field, which is the light green type. And they can grow the 4 agricultural products: wheat, olives, wine, or sheep. They work the same way as the woodcutter. So you'll choose a field hex within your zone of control, and you'll sow one of the resources there. When you do that, it'll sow in each adjacent field space as well. So if you sow a sheep here, you're only going to have 1 hex with sheep on it because there are no fields adjacent. Whereas if you sow a sheep down here, you'll end up with 4 sheep hexes because there's 3 fields adjacent plus the one where you originally where you had originally sown the sheep. You don't sow sheep anyway, where you, I guess, grazed the sheep. There's 2 fields that we can't access, right? We can't graze any sheep here. We can't graze any sheep here. We could here and then have it on 2. When a good is harvested, when a resource is harvested from a field hex, that hex is now polluted, which means you can't grow anything on it. You can't graze anything on it. You can build on it. You can't build a woodcutter because there's no wood to cut, right? But you could build one of the other building types. But you can no longer harvest a resource from it until you've cleaned it. So let's look at our third terrain type, mountains. Mountains are black hexes, and they form ranges. So this is a mountain range, and they can be mined for either stone or gold. The game is inconsistent with its language here. It'll refer to a quarry where stone is mined and a mine for where gold is mined, but you'll see mine used also for stone. So just know you're not going to be getting any gold from a quarry. But you can get stone from something called a mine or from a quarry. Now, when you build a mine or a quarry, it's the same as the woodcutter, same as in the fields. You will be mining adjacent mountain hexes for the same resource. So if I chose to build a quarry here, I would get stone from here, 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 and here. If I chose to build a quarry here, I would get stone from here, 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 and here. Now, if I chose to build a quarry here, I would get stone from here, 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 and here, and I would destroy that discovery. It wouldn't be possible to get that discovery any longer in the game. The same is true for this one down here that was in the forest. If I was cutting wood in this forest before I got to that discovery is taken out of the game. You can't build over them, and you can't harvest from a hex that has a discovery. It'll destroy the discovery. Now, if I've chosen to make a quarry here, this entire range can only ever be quarried for stone. You can't make a gold mine out of it. If I made a gold mine, this entire mountain range would have to be used for gold, not for stone. And after we harvest from a mountain space, it is now polluted, the same as a field. You would need to clean the space in order to exploit it again. So what's our last type of terrain? We've talked about forest, field, and mountains. It is, of course, water. Now, water can be exploited for fish, dye, and pearls. And fisheries are a little different from our other buildings. Like our woodcutters and our quarries and our fields are built on the hex that they will exploit. But a fishery, we're not going to build over water. We're going to build adjacent to water. So fisheries are going to take up 2 hexes instead of 1, and each adjacent water hex will be exploited for the resource that you select. So if I built a fishery over here, I could exploit this hex of water for one of fish, dye, or pearls. If I built my fishery here, then these 2 would be adjacent to my fishery, and I could choose what they would be harvested for. So let's say I built a fishery here for fish. So these 2 hexes are fish. And then I built a fishery here. This fishery is touching 3 water hexes, 1, 2, and 3. Now, even though this is adjacent to a fish hex, I could, with this fishery, let's say I'm harvesting pearls. So I could do pearl, 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 fish, fish by using two different fisheries. With fisheries, it's important to think of it as the fishery is a specialized location, not the water. The fishery only knows how to harvest one thing. So whatever hex is adjacent to that fishery will be harvesting that resource. Now, if I built a fishery in this space, I could harvest from all four of these hexes. And again, like the mountains and the fields, once you harvest from this resource type of hex, it is polluted. So those are our four resource types. Nope, not our four resource types, our four terrain types. Shown again here. So farms are on fields, fishermen come from the water, mines are in the mountains, and woodcutters are in forest. Now we have three categories of resources. We have food. So we can get 3 food from farm and 1 food from the sea. We have luxury goods. We can get 1 from the farm, 2 from the sea, and 1 from the mines. So we have wine, pearls, dye, and gold. And we have 2 different types of building materials, stone and wood. So those are the 10 resource types that are used within the game. So we talked about the countryside. And remember, that's the shared play space that everyone has access to. Each player will also have their own city, leading into plural cities, which they will control. So let's talk about those. What do we do with those? How do we build those? Within the digital implementation, you'll start with a 7x7 grid, and that's your first city. Any subsequent city is going to be 6x6, slightly smaller. So your initial city, your capital city, is going to be 7x7. And you will have access to different types of buildings. So the shape, each building has a different shape, and you can rotate them by 90 degrees, but you can't flip them on their belly. So for this shape, for example, you could rotate it so that the 4 bricks, adjacent bricks, are on top of each other, and then the one is sticking out this way. You could never have this oriented, though, to where you have the 4 horizontal and then this one above the first one. It just wouldn't happen. So when placing these tiles, these buildings within your city, this white block, this block of the building corresponds to any of these places. Those are the places where it can legally fit. So you would click the white hex that corresponds to where you want, or hex, click the white square which corresponds to where you want this square of the building to go. So if I want this building to go up in this part, I would click on this square. Similarly, after I've built some buildings, let's say I want this granary to go right here, to go like this. I would click on this square because it corresponds to this one, and that would put my granary going like this. If I clicked here, my granary would go like that. If I clicked here, this brewery would go like that. And that's just something within the game, the online version of the game. So let's talk about what the different types of buildings are. There are 3 different types of buildings. The first is a house. Houses. Houses are this dark olive color on your board. They are always 1 by 1. This chart shows how much it costs to build each individual house. So our first 4 houses are free. And then we have houses that cost 1 resource. This house costs 1 resource. Then we have 2 resources. So this one costs a food and a luxury item. This one costs 2 food. 2 different food. That's what the D means. In this sort of diagonal row, they cost 3 resources, either ranging from 3 food to 1 food and 2 luxury. These houses cost 4 resources. These houses cost 5. And these houses cost 6. And we'll talk about what the number in front of them means later. Spoiler alert, it's got to do with San Nicolo. But they'll be highlighted in red if you're able to build them in your house or in your city. Now, each house provides 1 worker. Some of your buildings need to have an employee, need to have labor in them. Some buildings don't. So let's talk about the type of building that needs labor. These buildings are variable sizes, and they will not work if they are not manned. And they include all of these different types of buildings. So they are, if they do not currently have a worker in them, they're this dark red. If they do have a worker in them, they're bright red. You can click on the building to man it. And if there's someone in it, you can click on the building to unman it. And we'll talk about what each of these buildings does over the course of the slideshow. So olive-colored buildings are these houses. Manned buildings, buildings that need labor, are either going to be dark red if they're unmanned or bright red if they're manned. And the third type of building, of course, is going to be this light olive color, which are buildings that don't need labor. They, again, are going to be variable sizes, and they will work if unmanned as long as, and this is also true for the other buildings, for the buildings that require labor, they will work as long as there are no graves inside of them. So we'll talk about graves a little bit later, and we'll hopefully remember that point. So there are only 4 buildings that don't need labor: the cathedral, the brewery, the granary, and fountains. Each building type, most building types can only be built once in your city, in your country, in your nation state. I'm not sure what they're called. And that is, the ones that can be built as many times as you want are fountains, houses, up to 20. There's 20 houses. Carts. I think you can build as many explorers as you want. And storage. Build as many storage spaces as you'd like. Okay, so those are the 3 types of buildings: houses, buildings that require labor, and buildings that don't require labor. Now, we briefly mentioned zone of control earlier. Let's go back to zone of control and see how we can figure out how big our zone of control is, what spaces in the countryside we are legally allowed to work with. To start with, your default zone of control is going to be 2 spaces away from your city. And remember, as long as a worker is within your zone of control, they can harvest from outside of your zone of control. So if I had a sheep grazing here, I could have sheep here and here. So you'll notice the purple player, their zone of control extends out like this, and the orange player, their zone of control extends out like this. Except. So if we were to count out from the orange city, we could go 1, 2, sure, that's within. 1, 2, okay, that's within. Except not okay. We cannot cross water without a harbor, or unless we can get to that hex a different route. So, for example, this hex over here is in our zone of control because we can get there from counting from here. 1, 2. This one, 1, 2. This one, 1, 2. But this hex, I can't get to because there's water here, there's water here. This guy's okay, but there's water here. I can't get to this hex. So it's not within my zone of control. So that's important to remember. Okay, so that's a default zone of control. How do we increase our zone of control? Well, there are 3 ways. The first way is by building an inn. So inns are these squares, player color squares. They are built within an existing zone of control, and they extend the zone of control 2 spaces out. So, for example, this inn, the zone of control goes out to here, because this space is within 2 spaces of this inn, right? This space is within 2 spaces of this inn. This space over here, 1, 2. That's a weird example because of the C. We'll talk about that. This space, within 2 of this. This space, within 2 of this. Those are inns. So you can use inns to kind of chain out and to increase your zone of control. Our next way of extending our zone of control is a harbor. What a harbor does, a harbor is a manned building within your city. If the harbor is manned, any body of water that has an adjacent inn or city now includes all adjacent shore spaces in the zone of control. So we have an inn touching this body of water, which means every single hex that's adjacent to that body of water is considered to be part of the zone of control, which is how we were able to build this inn over here. Otherwise, this space would not have been within the zone of control of just these two inns in this city, right? We needed to have the harbor so we could get up here. And that's how these spaces are included in the zone of control, because they're not within two spaces of an inn or a city. They are adjacent to a body of water that is adjacent to an inn. So it's another way you can increase your zone of control. The last way is through stables. And what stables do is they extend the zone of control by one space in all directions. So if this city had a manned stable, all of these spaces would be included in the zone of control. All of these spaces, all of these, not this one, these guys, all around like this, and those two. Because the entire zone would just be stretched out one more space in each direction. Now you can also increase your zone of control by building another city. So if I were to build a city, let's say here, that would increase my zone of control by 2 in all directions. So, how do you win the game? Is a very good question, and something you'll want to keep in mind while you're playing the game. This game actually has 5 distinct win conditions, but you do not have to worry about all of them. You are going to make a choice in the game that will determine which win condition you will be eligible for. You'll only ever be eligible for one of the 5 win conditions. The 5th one's a little weird and might actually prove my statement incorrect. You be the judge. So, how do you decide what your win condition's going to be? Well, you're going to build a cathedral and you're going to venerate a saint. So the first saint that we can venerate is going to be San Nicolo. Now, each of the saints focuses on one aspect of gameplay and gives you a win condition and a bonus. So for San Nicolo, as we kind of spoiled earlier, he has to do with houses. His bonus is whenever you build a house, you pay for the house, you can build any house that has a number lower than the house that you paid for free. You can build a second house. So if I paid a food and 2 different luxury goods for house number 10, I could build houses 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, well, 4 could always be free. So we'll say 6 or 5 for free if I'm venerating San Nicolo. Now, San Nicolo's win condition is that all 20 houses must be built. Once all 20 houses are built, if you're the only one who has accomplished a win condition by the end of the game, bravo, it's a different country. Is bravo Italian? I am not a Romance language person. But then you win. So maybe brava. I am a woman, I can win games too. Doesn't matter. I can't think of anything else. Okay, so that's how you can win with San Nicolo. Build all 20 houses. Santa Barbara is similar. She doesn't care if you build 20 houses, all your houses. She cares if you build all of your buildings. And in the game, it lists the buildings that you haven't built yet and also tells you how many resources it would cost to build all of those buildings in one go. So in this case, for all these buildings, it would cost 8 wood, 9 stone, and 4 luxury goods. So what is her benefit? Typically, when you place a building in one of your cities, it's permanently there. But Santa Barbara, during the city building phase, allows you to rearrange your buildings and houses within your city. And your graves. You can rearrange your graves too. Yes. So you can do that every turn during the city building phase. So we have San Nicolo, who deals with houses. We have Santa Barbara, who deals with other buildings, urban buildings. So let's see what we have next. We have San Giorgio, who deals with zone of control. And the way that he does that, his win condition is if your zone of control contains another player's zone of control, then you win. So in this example, purple's zone of control contains all of orange's zone of control. Now, it doesn't mean that orange can't do anything, because if they have mutual zone of control in a space, then whoever is first in turn order can manipulate that space if they choose to. So for example, these woods, this space, well, I guess that's a mine, actually. This mine is within both players' zone of control. So let's say both of them wanted to build a mine on this mountain space. They could, whoever is the first player in turn order would get to it first. So it's not that they have exclusive rights to a space. It's that if they wanted to, they have access to the space. So San Giorgio, you must control another player's zone of control within your own. And his bonus is, in the harvest phase, you get a fish for any cathedral built during that turn. So the turn that you build your cathedral, the subsequent harvest phase, you would get a fish. And if there were any other cathedrals that had already been built, then you get a fish for that. So in a 4-player game, you could get up to 4 fish. You would get up to 4 fish. Hopefully everybody would build a cathedral because that's necessary. In a 3-player game, 3 fish. 2-player game, 2 fish. So that's San Giorgio. Then we have San Christofori. And San Christofori is concerned with resources. So to win with San Christofori, you have to have 3 of each luxury good and food. So this is a screenshot from a player's inventory who beat me with San Christofori because they had 3 of the food and 3 of the luxury resources. 3 of each. Now, his bonus is you can store any amount of goods without a storage building. And when we talk about the storage phase of gameplay, you'll see how important that is. It's huge, especially for first-time players. If this is the first time you're playing Antiquity, you should really think about him or our next saint, because it can be tricky to plan exactly what you're going to do with all your resources, and to a point where you're not losing any because of poor planning. And there's going to be at least one time during the game where you plan poorly and you make a mistake. You should look forward to it. You should embrace it. So, our 5th saint is a little bit different from the other 4 in that she's the mother of all saints. So, it's Santa Maria, and her bonuses are everybody's bonuses. She gives you what everyone would give you. She gives you unlimited storage, like San Christofori. She gives you fish when cathedrals are built, like San Giorgio. She gives you the extra free house, like San Nicolo. She lets you rearrange cities, like Santa Barbara. But, because you have all of that extra help, you must accomplish 2 of the other saints' win conditions to win. So you have to have either all your workers, all your houses built, 3 of each luxury and food, surround another player, or have all your buildings built. Which I think makes sense. She's giving you a lot of extra help. So you should, in theory, be able to accomplish 2 more things with that extra help. So that's how you win. Okay. Well, how do you play the game? Let's look at the game sequence and what to do. The first phase of each turn is all rise. So any workers in city buildings will be returned to your free worker pool. Each worker is represented by a pitchfork in the free worker pool. So this person has 2 free workers available. You'll take all your men off city buildings. Any worker in the countryside will remain in the countryside until all of the resources in their peripheral hexes have been harvested and the hex that they're on have been harvested. Then they'll come back and you can use them in subsequent turns. So that's the first step, all rise. Our second step is city building. So city building is done simultaneously for all the players, and it's a secret. You can't see what someone else is doing this turn. You will choose which workers will man which buildings. There will be times where you won't be able to man all of the buildings that you have, and you'll have to make a choice. What am I doing? You can build new houses, and those new workers are available immediately upon being built. You can trade in the market. So the way the market works is interesting. Players can trade with each other as long as one of the players who are trading has a manned market in their city. So let's say I was playing with Kevin and I have a manned market. I could trade with Kevin. Kevin could trade with me. It's fine. Or vice versa. If Kevin had a manned market, I could trade with Kevin because he's got a market. Or you can trade with the bank if you have a market. So if you have a market, you can trade with the bank at a 2-to-1 exchange. So I could trade 2 resources of any kind, or 1 resource, 2 different resources, and get a 3rd resource from the bank. That's how the market works. The hospital, if manned, allows you to clean up 5 graves from any of your cities. It doesn't have to be the city that the hospital is in. And you can decide which graves you want to clean up. The Faculty of Theology will let you raise your cathedral, and you can rebuild it in the future if you want to venerate a different saint. So let's say you venerated San Christofori, and then you're like, I can't do that win condition. I want to raise that cathedral, and I want to do Santa Barbara. I think I have a better chance with Santa Barbara. You can use the Faculty of Theology if it's manned. Destroy your cathedral, and then build another one. Faculty of Philosophy is going to let you ignore the different requirement. So if you're building a house that requires 2 different food and 1 luxury good, if the Faculty of Philosophy is manned, you can do 2 of the same food and a luxury good. You can ignore that. You can ignore the D. Now, you might be wondering why I have put the Faculty of Philosophy upside down. It's not some sort of political statement. What it is, I don't know if your mind, I would automatically assume that I'm making a political statement with that, but it's not. So let's say I wanted both the Faculty of Theology and the Faculty of Philosophy's effects to be active in the same turn. I could man each of them, so 2 workers to be able to run the 2 faculties, or if they are adjacent to the university, I can man the university, and any faculty that's adjacent to the university would be activated. It only costs 1 worker in that case. So that's why I put the Faculty of Philosophy upside down, so you can kind of visualize that these 2 could be in the same city with the university kind of nestled in between their little Pac-Man mouths. And there are 2 other faculties as well that could then go on the other 2. They could go there and there. And then you could run all 4 faculties with only 1 worker in a university if you've dedicated a whole city to the university. Okay, that's city building. So let's move on to the 3rd phase, which is turn order. So this is 2 different players. The first player has an explorer, a cart, and has manned one of the carts. Because remember, the bright red means that that building has been manned. This player has 2 carts and an explorer. So same thing. They have 3 buildings that'll potentially count towards turn order. Turn order is determined by the smallest number of manned carts and explorers. So in this case, this player would get to go first because their number of manned carts and explorers is 0. This player would go second because their number is 1. Now, if it's the same, if they're tied, then turn order would stay the same as it was the round before. So that's what resolve ties by last turn order means. If there's a tie, nothing changes for turn order. So our 4th phase is building in the countryside, building on the land. And this is where the cart shop comes into play. So it's important to think of the cart shop, not when you man it, that worker isn't staying in the city. Imagine it's like the beginning of Skyrim, and instead of being political prisoners on your way to your execution, you are sitting in the back, well, that worker is sitting in the back of the cart being taken out to the countryside, not as like a euphemism for being executed, but to work. So if I had a manned cart shop, That's how I would get this woodcutter out into the field, right? That's how I would get a miner. That's how I would get a fishery, by having a manned cart shop. So what buildings can you build with a manned cart shop? A woodcutter, a gold mine, a stone mine, fisherman, or a farm. And remember, those workers are going to stay out there until all of the hexes that they have worked with have been processed. So this woodcutter is going to come back in a maximum of 4 turns. This woodcutter is going to come back in a maximum of 6 turns. And I say maximum, and we'll talk about why in the next slide. No, in the harvest slide. We'll talk about why. So, cart shops can also build cities. And cities are these turtle-shaped, 7 hex shapes. And they, to legally place a city, it needs to be within your zone of control, at least 1 hex. One part of the turtle needs to be in your zone of control. And you cannot build on water. So I couldn't build my hex here, centered out from here, because it would go on water. But you can build on pollution. Cities are one of the building types you can build on pollution. You can build fishermen on pollution. And you can build inns on pollution. The way you build an inn is you have to have a brewery in your city. And they're unmanned, so once you have it in there, you're fine. You man a cart shop, and that cart worker will spend a food to place an inn somewhere in your zone of control, and then they'll come back. They don't stay at the inn, which is good. The stables are also going to come into effect now. Remember, the stables extend your zone of control by 1 space in all directions, and the harbor is going to control your zone of control, is going to increase your zone of control around the shores of any bodies of water that your inns or cities are adjacent to. Now, our last 2 faculties for a university are triggered in the land building phase. The faculty of biology will give you 1 free seed from olive, sheep, wheat, or wine, as long as you have a manned cart that you can send out to toil in the fields. Then you can sow a new field in surrounding hexes. The faculty of alchemy is the only way that you can clean pollution from the countryside. So let's say that there was pollution. Let's say there's pollution instead of these trees, okay? What you would do is you select one of the hexes that has pollution in. That hex and any adjacent polluted hex would be cleaned by the faculty of alchemy. So maximum you can clean 7 hexes a turn. Because 1 and then the adjacent 6. And that one that you choose initially has to be within your zone of control. So that is land building. Next, we're going to have storage. We talked a little bit about storage with San Cristofori, and that if you have venerated San Cristofori or Santa Maria, you don't have to worry about storage ever again. But if you haven't, either you haven't built your cathedral or you're focusing on someone else, in order to store leftover goods that you didn't use in the land building or the city building, you need to have storage in your city. Storage costs 1 wood. When you build it, you can build it any size. It has to be a rectangle that is composed of smaller rectangles that measure 1 by 2. So this example would be 2 of those rectangles, so 2 by 2, and it still only costs 1 wood. And it needs to be manned. And this is where you'll store leftover goods. You can store 1 per square. So if I had 5 leftover fish, I could store 4 in this storage building, and I would have to discard the last 1. If I didn't have any storage and I didn't have, I wasn't venerating a saint that allowed me unlimited storage, I would have to discard any of my goods that I have left. So after we've done that, after we've taken care of storing our goods, then we can harvest more goods. So these 2 show a before and after, and these 2 show a before and after. So this initial one, the game will show you what pods you haven't harvested from yet. They'll outline it in white, and they'll show that you have to choose one of those resources from that pod. Now you'll notice that the middle one you can't take. That's where your worker is, and that'll be the last one to be harvested. So you choose whichever one you want. I think in this example, yeah, I chose this one. And then the game will show you what resources you've chosen, and you'll see that nothing is outlined in white anymore, like over here. So you'll validate it and you'll be done. You harvested 2 resources. So then in the subsequent round, let's say that we've got a pod of forest, we've got a quarry and a fishery that is dealing with pearls. So you take 1 from each pod. So we have the 2 wood, the stone, and the pearl, and then we'd be able to validate. Now, if in your city you have forced labor, the building forced labor, and it is manned, how you harvest is you will take a good from a pod of resources and trash it, and then harvest 2 resources. So in this case, you would trash a tree, a wood, and then harvest 2 wood. Trash a stone, harvest 2 stone. Trash a wood, harvest 2 wood, and that sends your worker back. Trash a pearl, harvest 2 pearl. So you're doubling your output for the round, but you've also trashed 4 resources. Now, there's a benefit, of course, because you have more resources to work with at this point. You have lost resources, but you're also going to get your workers back sooner because they're not going to be tied up. So that's why earlier I said, like in this example, this worker is going to be out here in the field for 6 turns because it's going to take 6 harvests for us to get them back. Now, if we did forced labor, that would only be 2 turns, right? And I would get 4 goods out of it. I would have to trash 2, but I would get 4. So there are times in the game where that makes more sense. Harvest is also when San Giorgio would provide a fish for each cathedral built in that turn. So that's harvesting. We talked about forced labor. Excellent. Okay. Then we would explore. So if we have a manned explore building, then the explorer can go out to the small flags within the zone of control and discover a new agriculture, sheep, wheat, or olive. And famine will be raised by 1 if food is discovered. So wheat, sheep, or olive. If you discover wine, it doesn't affect famine. But if you discover one of the other 3, it does affect famine. What? What's famine? Well, that's a good thing you asked, because that's what we're talking about now. So up at the top, you'll see what the current famine level for the game is. Famine level is the same for all players. Players don't have individual famine levels. And the way famine works is when it's famine time, you will have to place graves in your city equal to the level of the famine. Now, there's 2 things that'll mitigate that number. The first is the granary. If you have the granary built in one of your cities, then you can subtract 3 from the famine level, and that's how many graves you'll put in the city. If you've got food in your inventory, you can subtract 1 per food in your inventory, and you keep the food. So it's important to think that you don't just have, like in this case, I have a pearl, right? It's important to think that I don't just have a single pearl, but like I got a sack of pearls. And so using some of them isn't going to get rid of the sack. I'm still going to have the sack of pearls. So this wouldn't be 1 sheep. It would be like a flock of sheep, and I could slaughter 1 to help deal with famine. That's how you should think about it in your head. Remember, because I forget this frequently, wine is not a food. Wine does not affect famine. So you can have as much wine as you want. It's not going to mitigate that famine level number. Now, the game will ask you where you want to put your graves. You choose. Wonderful. If you don't have any empty spaces in your city for graves, you got to start putting them in buildings. And this is going to have an effect on your employees, on the labor. They don't want to work in a building with dead bodies. So this harbor, I can't use it anymore until I clean out the graves or move them somewhere else. You can't put them in people's houses. People don't do well with that. So I could still use this dump, but I couldn't use this harbor any longer. If you are unable to place all of the graves that you need to in the famine stage, you lose the game. You need to have space for the graves. Otherwise, you fail as a civilization. Then at the end, when everybody's done their famine, we'll raise the famine level by 1. It's not 1 per player. It's just 1 across the board. So famine level will always be at least turn level -1 at the end of the famine phase. Here it's famine 4 because remember, exploring and discovering food increases the famine. So in this example, 3 foods have been found that increase the famine level to 4. Poof. Okay, so famine is putting graves in your cities. We also have to think about pollution in the countryside. So our next phase is going to be pollution, which is, the rate of pollution is 3 pollutions per city. Each pollution round, you need to place 3 pollutions per city that you have. This is mitigated by the dump. If you have a manned dump, then you can mitigate pollution by 4. And if you have fountains, then you'll be mitigating the pollution by 1 per fountain. And you can have as many, remember, you can build as many fountains as you'd like in your cities. So pollution will be mitigated by 1 per fountain, 4 per dump. You can only ever have 1 dump in your civilization. If you don't have room in your zone of control any longer for pollution, then you need to put graves in your cities. If you don't have room for graves in your cities, you lose the game. If you have a manned dump, other players cannot pollute spaces within your zone of control. Even if they share zone of control, they can't pollute it because of your dump, and vice versa. If they have a dump, you can't pollute in their space, even if you share it. The fountain, as well as mitigating pollution, when you build it, you will lower the global famine level because hygiene has gone up. People are healthier in general. So if famine level is at 7, you build a fountain, you'll lower it to 6. Now that's not triggered every round. That's only triggered when you build the fountain. But that is another good benefit of fountains. Fountains are good. They're kind of expensive, but they're good. All right, so that's pollution. And then our last step is to check for victory. What, at this point, has anyone met the victory condition of their venerated saint? If yes, then they win. If 2 people do it by the end of the round, then you'll go to tiebreaker. Who has the largest unpolluted zone in their zone of control? So you'll count all of the spaces, or the game will count all of the spaces within your zone of control that do not have pollution, and whoever has the highest number wins. There are further tiebreakers, I think, but it shouldn't get to that. And if it does, the rule book is online. It's not helpful. One of the things for Santa Barbara, we didn't talk about this, part of her victory condition, every building must be built at least once, and you must not have any graves in any of your buildings. So that example earlier with the harbor that was full of graves, I couldn't win with Santa Barbara at that point because the buildings would need to be able to be activated in order for me to win with Santa Barbara. So that is the slideshow. One thing that is included in the physical copy, but on the digital version isn't so obvious where it is the list of the different buildings and how much they cost. So if you're playing on play.boardgamecore.net, again, the link is in the description, then from the game, this is a spoiler for the playthrough later, you can go over to this menu, and if you click on Help, you'll open this tab that has 5 different tabs in them. So we've got the sequence, the 10 steps for each turn. We've got the buildings, their names, their shapes, what resource they cost to build, and then what they do. It'll also mention here if it needs to be manned or not. So if you forget, because there are a lot of buildings, that would be perfectly understandable to forget what they cost, what they do. then you can click on that help and get over here to the buildings. Buildings tab is all your city buildings. Land buildings are going to be the ones you can build in the countryside. And they'll tell you the name, what they make, what they cost to build, what kind of terrain you can place it on, and what happens after you harvest from that building, right? So after you harvest from the woodcutter, it turns into grass. It calls it grass and not a field, but you get it. This is that resource chart that I used in the PowerPoint, and this is the saints and their bonus and their victory condition, and also their pictures, which I also took for the PowerPoint. One more thing I want to go over before the end is in the actual rule book for the game. On the last page, there is a page with advice for what to do. So you can pause this and read this introductory paragraph. Kind of briefly just go over the basic strategy here. Always make sure to have a woodcutter. If you're down to your last wood and you don't have any woodcutters out in the countryside, you need to build a woodcutter, because otherwise you don't have any way to get wood unless you have a market, and it costs wood to build a market. So if you run out of wood, you don't have a market, and your opponent doesn't have a market or doesn't want to build a market just to give you wood, then you are stuck in the game. Because remember, you can't trade with the bank through another player's market, just through your own market. So second bullet point, build 2 or even 3 cart shops in the first turn. Building 3 cart shops in the first turn is interesting. I guess that's assuming you're not going to do an exploration move in the first turn, which now that I think about it, makes a lot of sense. It's not a bad way to go. Some of the good things about this game is because there's so many decisions that you make, so many choices that the player has to make, that you could go different routes, but hopefully get to a victorious situation. Quickly get food production up to 6 to 8 houses to ensure a decent workforce, because remember, your workforce is going to be tied up out in the countryside if you have any countryside buildings active. Then build a second city. Stores are essential for beginning players, but only for them? What a mystery. And what it means there is not just storage, but also storage through the cathedral, veneration of Maria or Christofori. And the implication with this sentence, I think, is that if you're a more experienced player, then you can plan better what you're going to need and when, so that you don't need to have storage, because you can have I get the resource and I automatically use it. Focus on winning as well as expansion. Most beginning players forget to focus on a win condition and expand too much. Produce just enough to win, but not too much. And that is important. It's hard to keep that in mind, I think. So actively work on that. The woodcutter is very important. I've had to resign games because I have messed up my wood production. So that is Splatterspellen's Antiquity, one of my favorite games. And hopefully this has been helpful in terms of teaching it so that you learn it. Definitely, if you're teaching it either in person after this coronavirus all dies down, or through Discord, use the PowerPoint, please. I included the link in the description so that you can use it to explain the game and have fun with your friends. And yeah, I hope that this was helpful, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.